It's time for another mutation drawing. I love making these. I've talked before about how I want to create a series to make an exhibition. Have enough drawings to make something which I can have up in a gallery with the original drawings, and then hopefully a screen next to it showing the digital image being produced, and then showing that side by side with the original drawing. Now I have in this folder, sorry about the mess on this desk, but in this folder I have some artwork of these mutation drawings here. So I was thinking, you've got these drawings of the different mutations and they're whole pages. You can see this one. I don't know if you can see this one. You see it? There. Now it's whole pages of the mutations. That's my cow belly. There's another one there, mutation. And then I've got the tree guy there. This is a texture page. But my thinking is, the way that I started doing these mutations wasn't the whole page like this. It was covering the surface, but I had patches of blank space. And that was something which Peter Draws had prompted, or Peter Deligdish has prompted, as a way of making art if you didn't know how to start a drawing. Oh my God. Excuse me. You know what? This could actually be ideal. If I use this oval shape on the cover, I could draw off it. Alright, let's try that. This isn't the first time that I've used this oval from the centre of a packet of tissues in order to start a drawing. I did make a doodle. It was one which I think I called Red Onions. It was one which I did lots of arcing lines, just lots of ellipses or half elliptical marks that all overlapped and interwove, and it became something which reminded me of red onions. Now don't ask me why red. I think it's because of the tonality of red onions that it made it look more like that than white onions, but who knows. And that was a doodle where I felt as though if I would have stopped sooner, it would have looked better because there would have been more gaps. Perhaps that was part of an influence for this drawing here, because I have this feeling where a certain amount of coverage on the page is powerful when it's given breathing space by leaving emptiness, you know, just the whiteness of the page, and other parts can be drawn with detail and given texture. It's something which I like to explore more and more with each drawing, especially these mutation drawings. There's something where I'm really experimenting on the page and trying to create new shapes and try out combinations and really see where it can go. But at the same time, I want it to belong as part of a collection. And that's what I like about these drawings as well, is that they do feel like they're almost part of a narrative and something which I'm creating from this influence, which I've mentioned in an interview recently. I said that a lot of these drawings must come from my influence from Katsuhiro Otomo, because I watched his film Akira when I was quite young, and I loved the idea that Tetsuo became engorged by this spirit of Akira and became a mutation towards the end, and all of his representational form started to warp and become expanded and engulf everyone and everything around him, and that became a big influence for what I'm drawing here. I really like some of these abstract shapes and things which look like they're internal organs, and yet they're so strange and unusual they can't really be identified. They're just part of a strange illustrative comic book like world, but to me they look like they're partway in motion. And I like things that look as though they are drifting in space and floating and expanding and contracting and part of a movement, really. And I have a lot of different influences as well. There's a lady who I've interviewed and I consider a friend, even though I've never met her in person, Andy Soto, and she does a lot of this kind of stringy spaghetti-like stuff for hair. So that's something which I use a lot for this type of drawing as well. But yeah, it's an ongoing process, and I think at this stage I'm really, trying to push it into a new space. Now, at this stage in the drawing, I'm wondering how to fill this space and unify everything, because I'm struggling to actually connect these last few mutation ideas with the rest of the drawing. I like how this has worked out, but I think a few more details and connections can be made. I'd like to fill up this space here because it's looking a little bit empty. If I were to have a lot more of this complicated, darker strands coming out of here somewhere, I think that would really make an interesting compositional difference with regards to the tonal values on the page. Some of this stuff, this is actually influenced from the farming work that I've been doing. This is a plein air painting, but it's on the farm that I've been doing the collaborative project. Basically, the silage foil, which is like a black plastic that the hay bales get wrapped in, and that's an intrinsic part of the project that me and my working partner are making. As far as it's a theme, really, is to notice how that kind of blemish on the environment, and yet farming is so important, but that is an element that is really quite ugly, and that's worked its way into the mutations because it's almost like drapery or some kind of amazing fabric. I started drawing some silage foil based on reference. I have these 3 drawings here. I have this, which is going to be exhibited, which is basically some farming machinery, which is got all grass or hay or something tangled in it. I've started this cow, and then at a very early stage I have this silage foil, and you can see the relation between this image where it is and my mutation drawing. Let's see how it goes. And the more that I work into this space, the more it starts to unify and make sense. I realise that it's not so difficult to leave this white space in between. And my concern a lot of the time is that I will cover up too much of it and I'll lose that precious space in between all of these details. But I found that the more details I add, there's still so much space in between. To cover the whole surface is really quite tricky. And I like these bursts of light in between. They give a new type of energy to the illustration, and it's its own story, this image. I think using these shapes to mask off areas on the surface are quite a powerful tool. It's worked for me when I used post-it notes. It's worked when I use it with this oval from the inside of a tissue box, or the center of a tissue box. And I'm sure there's lots of other shapes and bits of packaging and things which I could probably design myself in order to utilize these geometric shapes as jumping off points for doodles, because you're just throwing lines off the edge of the shape, and then you have this masked off area. And it's a lot of what I realize when I start off this edge. So you can see here I'm just working my way down the oval, and then I can just remove it because I have all of those edges to start to build from. And that's all you really need, is something where you think this is now the shape which has been preserved, which is the oval, and all of these lines that come off it become something. And that's up to me then to create these different forms and to make sure that I'm not echoing too many of the same mutated shapes and ideas from earlier in the drawing, or from further back on the page or further forward, whichever way you read it. And I quite like making the details in the center of these shapes that I'm drawing. So I'll draw something which looks like a fairly organic shape, And afterwards I make the decision to add texture or some kind of lines which suggest form, and that's something which I enjoy quite a lot. Now this section here, which I'm covering with lines, I think could have been nicer if I would have left it less dense, because these overlapping strings here are quite nice, but then I cover all of it with hatching, and it's not hatching necessarily, it's lines which I try to follow through in between, but it's so dense that I lose all of this network of stringy vine things that I make in the beginning. But there we are, that's something which you just learn, and you can't see from close up. When I look through the camera, you can see it because you're removed from the surface to a degree. Just like taking a photograph of a drawing, you can see it clearer because you're given this distance. But up close, it becomes this obsession. You're mesmerized by all of the details and decisions you've made before, and trying to build off of those, trying to make sure that you honor certain choices that you've made so that they are consistent and make sense with where you're pushing it forward from there. For example, this point here at the bottom, I still have this force field bursting up above it, and I don't want to lose too much of it, but I do want to cover some of that lower section with tonality, because I noticed that the tone is more towards the top, and then I put some lower down in that archway that I just discussed earlier that's especially dense. So I go a little bit thinner, but I make sure that there are these stringy spaghetti-like vines that are a consistent feature throughout this page. And there's something which I think will always be a staple of the style of design that I'm working. I think they work quite nice and they unify a lot of the other elements of the drawing. And then I do one last burst and I start to connect certain parts. And that's because I couldn't leave so much space on the far left hand side of the page. It just wouldn't look balanced. So that was a decision that I had to make last minute. And I really thought that it was finished. And that's when this part I thought was just the last push that you have to do to make the drawing look right. And that's where I leave it. Now, I'm quite happy with it. I think it looks pretty good as it is. Well, that is the image done, and it all started with this little sleeve from the tissue box. Just one of those ovals, the cardboard slip from the top. You can use things like this in interesting ways. I'm sure there's all types of packaging you have. If you like to doodle like I do, or even do drawings like this one, then experiment with stuff like this. See what happens, especially geometric shapes. They're really fun. I wish I had a circle. If you have a circle, that would be a fun one to use. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks very much for watching.